Okay. Anybody else? Terry's from Orange, pesticide. Ventura? Yeah, you want some candy? Yeah, nice. You can throw that man some candy. Where? Right there. Oh. Oh.
Sorry. Frisbee method, not working out for me.
So the K listing, industry specific. They have to be coming from these industries, and oftentimes they're process specific. The people who spoke in the room, hit them up if you ever encounter K listing, but we're not going to delve into more than what we just did today. Which brings us to P&U. Who knows or has experience with P&U listed waste? Raise your hands again. Up high, up high. Who has not raised their hand but has pharmacies that dispense P&U listed pharmaceutical waste in their jurisdictions? Hopefully you went to the pharmaceutical presentation. That has a lot of good stuff in there. But because of which we'll get into for the empty containers with P listing waste, you're going to find a lot of stuff that you may not have thought falls in to this listing. So P listing is a list of chemicals that are acutely hazardous or acutely toxic, and they're going to cause either death in small amounts or major injury in small amounts. U listed, conversely, are also dangerous, but are going to cause cancer, carcinogenic, mutagenic, teratogenic, otherwise toxic, but not immediately dangerous to life. So they're not going to kill you as fast. So they got a special list. Commercial chemical product. This is important. As mentioned before, commercial chemical product, I'm going to refer to them as CCP, or manufacturing chemical intermediates. They have the RCRA Listed generic name, and that refers to a chemical substance which is manufactured or formulated for commercial manufacturing, and also sole active ingredient. So those are very important in this listing. There's an important regulatory distinction between CCPs that are unused, as the question came up earlier, and ones that are continually being reused. And a chemical that's unused can be considered off-spec CCP. So a generator has that option if it's contaminated without being used for its intended purpose. So something that's perhaps got contaminated with some water, rainwater, was stored outside, it's expired, it didn't pass QA/QC procedures, it just went past the recommended shelf life. Any of these factors could create an off-spec CCP. Went over that example. A chemical that is used is not unused, it's spent. So if that jar in that R&D facility had been used, as Leon explained too, you're using it for its intended purpose, P listing's gone. It has to be unused. So it's up to the generator to let you know of that during your inspection. Hopefully they know. And if they don't, then you can cross that bridge when you get there. And this last bullet's important, and it speaks directly to your question. Just because a container has been opened and some of the contents used does not make the container with chemical remain in it used. So it could be an off-spec CCP because of time, perhaps, but it's not used. There are specific terms. We touched on technical grade, and that's applicable to the P&U listing as well. Then also sole active ingredient. That means the active ingredient is the only chemically active component for the function of that product. This is also, there's a citation here, Federal Register 31336, that's July 1989. It speaks to sole active ingredient, but we'll give you just an example. Say you have a pesticide, sole active ingredient, we'll say endosulfan. You're using that pesticide, and it has maybe some solvents to mobilize the pesticide, to put it on the product, some fillers, inert ingredients. So, 2% active ingredient, endosulfan, 98% inert ingredients. If that's all of a sudden you have it on the shelf, you haven't used it, it's unused, that's a perfect candidate for a P listing. If there was 2 active ingredients, then it would no longer be eligible. It would probably be characteristic, but it wouldn't have the P listing because it's only one active ingredient. Those inert ingredients, that's not the intended purpose of the product as a solvent or as a filler or whatever. Those inert ingredients, it's meant as a pesticide, therefore that is the active ingredient. So again, P and EU listed wastes have not been used for their intended purpose. It applies to unused CCPs, off-spec CCPs, which I mentioned those examples of QA/QC, contamination, shelf life. Also applies to spill residues, soil or debris, contaminated by PRU listed wastes, if it can be determined that it was, in fact, a listed waste that caused that contamination. We'll get into that a little bit later, where that can differ. Container or inner liner removed from a container that held PRU listed waste. That's very important, especially with the pharmaceuticals, the container residue. So off-spec CCPs. EPA regulates these off-spec CCPs because in the formulation process, if you're manufacturing this chemical A, say, and for this QA/QC, they kick it out. They say, oh, it doesn't really meet our needs for this product. It's not going to be what we want. We're not going to sell it. EPA wants to regulate that as that product, that PRU listing, because in all likelihood it has those characteristics still. So that's why it's still in. Because as the last bullet says here, because off-spec variants are likely as hazardous as non-spec, they wanted to regulate them. So that's why they have this off-spec CCP designation. So examples of some CCP formulations. You have fluorine, P056, active ingredient mixed with chlorine, not a PRU listed waste. It's also an active ingredient. Will this have a PRU listing? I see a head shaking no. She needs some candy right there. She doesn't want any candy. Throw it to her anyways.
Oh, man.
So not a PRU. Why? 2. Easy. 2. Yeah, it's easy. Why these generators? Come on. Ketone, U142. At 3% concentration, the active ingredient plus a functionally inert. Will it have the U142 listing? Yes, I see. Her head was shaking right there, Leon. Hook her up with some candy. Oh, come on! You don't want to risk injury or bodily harm. Over here, right there. Reese's was her favorite, I can tell. All right, mixture rule. Leon touched on this earlier in his slides, so I'm not going to spend much time. But if it's a listed waste, which is all the waste that we've been discussing, is mixed with another waste, the resulting mixture is listed hazardous waste, bottom line. The exception is the 29 ICR, ignitable corrosive reactive waste, that are listed, and we'll see that list in a little bit. If it's on those and the waste doesn't have that characteristic at the point of generation, those are out per the mixture rule. So really we're only concerned with the toxic or listed wastes that are listed for their toxicity characteristic.
Except for the asterisk that I added in.
And the asterisks, yeah. And the 261.3 and .4 are the exemptions and exclusions. As always in the hazardous waste world, exemptions and exclusions. And this is just an example of that list, the ICR only. F03 with xylene, acetone, methanol, ethylbenzene. You can see on the list here, you can see over here in this column, it's all I's or C's or R's. There's no T's. And these are what are out of that list, of the mixture rule, if they are mixed with another waste or media of any sort. All right, rinseate. So I made some allusions to pharmaceuticals and containers of P-listing. When discarded, a P-listed waste, their empty container, per 261.7 B3, requires that it be triple rinsed with suitable solvent or managed as a hazardous waste. So with P-listing, you have either an empty container that you have to manage as hazardous waste because of the residues, or you have a rinseate that, as with the second bullet mentions, because of the mixture rule, if you're rinsing that 10% of that volume, you're rinsing it with water, the rinseate that you have generated is now a P-listed hazardous waste. So either way, when you're managing that container, you're stuck with a P-listed hazardous waste. That can be problematic, say, for something as simple as warfarin or Coumadin in a prescription bottle at a pharmacy. They're not going to rinse that. So they have to manage the container until that's added to the universal waste rule, hopefully, at the US EPA level, which is proposed currently. That's stuck. That's a hazardous waste. Before I move on, there is some guidance out there that I've seen from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection that specifically for the product I mentioned already, Coumadin warfarin, for specific milligram size of Coumadin warfarin, that they did sampling and determined that if it meets a certain size, I think it's 10 milligrams in one, I could be wrong, then it can be excluded. So there's ways around it if you're a generator in the room, but you need to determine it. It's on you. We have some questions to wrap it up here, which we'll be pointing to RCRA Online resources. These are just right from the number that's down on the bottom, the RCRA Online number. So you have a CCP being disposed. It contains osmium tetroxide and pyridine, a P and a U listed, both of which are the active ingredients. And we know the answer. Is this product listed for P or U? Answer's on the screen. Yeah, no, because there's more than one active ingredient. Easy. A QEA-QC solution consists of aldrin, P004, and dieldrin, P037, dissolved in a methanol solvent, will be disposed, but what waste code should be applied? You have a solvent. Oh, wait, there's a solvent. And maybe that's an F code. And then you have two P-listed codes. Now, the answer is, because it contains more than one active ingredient, bam, P listing's out. And if you remember back to the F listings, if it's not being spent as a solvent, it's not being used as that solvent, it's just the ingredient, F listing's gone too. Yes?
What's the logic behind two basic non-listed?
It's an excellent question. I wish I had that answer. Yeah, I don't know. I would imagine a lobbyist, a strong lobbyist, I think would be the logic. But as this says on the bottom bullet, that's very important. Just because something has more than one active ingredient doesn't mean it's automatically unregulated. It's just not listed. So you can always test for characteristics. And this one's likely characteristic for D001. So just because it's not listed, that's an important point, doesn't mean it's, oh, hey, have a nice day. There's still, you have to follow up with all the stuff that Leon was mentioning. We have paint stripper, contains methylene chloride, toluene, other inert materials. Is the unused paint stripper a listed CCP when disposed? And the answer depends. Depends. Is only the methylene chloride active ingredient, or is only the toluene active? If both, it's not listed. It might be characteristic, but it's not listed. And then just the added note, if it was a spent material because it was a used solvent because of the methylene chloride, then it will likely be F002 and F005 because of the toluene as well. Any questions on any of those? The citations are in here with the RCRA Online site. This will be posted online, so you can always refer back to these examples and the RCRA Online documents. It'll be really helpful. More resources here. I don't think we have them set up here, but it's all available again online. I think Leon already mentioned a lot that will already help. And some additional, do you want to talk about this one?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Just a user-friendly reference doc, EPA. It describes their waste characteristic regulations over the years and just can be really useful, along with just a host of all the RCRA stuff EPA has. And then additional resources, especially for California, DTSC website, Title 22, calcupa.net, and then non-California, McCoy's, and obviously RCRA. And McCoy's really is, Leon, you can't talk it up enough. It's really a nice resource.
All right. So I do have an answer to his question if y'all want to hear while we're on the topic of listed waste. It came to my brain. I'm like, oh yeah, RCRA Online 12863, duh. Don't know how I forgot that, but let me come right over here. I looked up listed waste in my Bible here, and it pointed out this exact document, and it goes back, and if you really want to know the why, it's nice. They give you this nice document, and if you've ever looked at one of those, you'll not go back looking for one again because it's too much information and too hard to find what you're looking for. But it is there, the intent, the reasons. So here's why they're saying, and the question was, why would, it was only 1% of an F listed waste, but it was over the 10% of an F1, 2, 4, or 5. Why? That doesn't make sense. Why would I attach that F listing onto the manifest even though it's not ignitable only, like the F3 is? And it clarifies right here, the EPA didn't evaluate all the F003s for their toxicity, and no determination could be made to the ignitability of a mixture with an F003. So the 10% threshold applies in this modified format under the solvent mixture rule. And here it is. The mixture contains only F003. F3 applies. Or the mixture contains one or more F3. And remember, the F doesn't have a specific amount. And 10% or more of other listed solvents prior to use. Therefore, the mixture would be listed under RCRA for the purposes of notification and manifesting. They would designate it as a F3 and a F5. So there's the answer to your question.
So it may not make sense, but there it is.
Yeah.
In infinite wisdom.
So, can you address F00, well, the F codes, as you might apply them to solvent wipes? So, I know it has been past practice for some people when they have solid wipes that have come in contact with F-listed solvents.
Mm-hmm.
To view those solid materials as F-coded waste. You know,
Which F code are you specifically referring to? Because I think on 1, 2, 4, 5, I don't think there's a way you could say they're not regulated unless they're taking advantage of some type of recycling of that actual wipe, more like a soil textile material. Because 1, 2, 4, 5, you've got that waste. If it's before use at 10%, then you're in for the listing. If you're an F3 solvent wipe, I've taken the approach that when I found it in a trash can at a facility is run a sample and see if it's ignitable. And if it no longer fails ignitability, back at the point of generation, then I didn't feel I had a leg to stand on in pursuing enforcement. You have anything to add?
No.
No? Okay. Nope. Cool. So, yeah, the EPA, I think, for 10 or 15 years has been working on their contaminated wipes and rags rule. And I remember when I was new 13 years ago, we were talking about that. When is it in or out or not? And so far, the status quo has been if they find a way to reuse the textiles that have those on it, launder them and bring them back, then that wasn't subject to regulation. Now, you may generate an F-listed waste somewhere else in that process, but that, listing and waste is not necessarily subject to the full set of the regulatory scheme, the requirements. Want to take a break?
Yeah. So break time, I'd focus more on the ones on the left or right, not the one in the middle.